Morning. Remember this story?
Yeah.
Her name was Brittany Hamilton, and her life was just moving along. She had a promising career as a surfer, winning contests all over the world, and nobody could beat her. And then, as you saw in the video, something happened. Her life was suddenly interrupted, and her arm was taken from her. And if you remember watching the movie, she went through an incredible depression because the thing that she always was able to do, she was no longer able to do anymore. And it was a pretty long, drawn-out process as she was fighting through some of those emotions that all of us would. But how often does that happen? When life is just going along and you've got it all planned out. You know exactly what you're going to do. Most of you know what you're going to do tomorrow. Or at least you think you do. Right? You know what you're going to do this afternoon. You know where you're going to eat lunch today. At least you think you do. But at any moment, at any time, and most of us have been living long enough to know this to be true, something can happen that can totally derail your train. Burrito Brothers I don't even want to say that. I don't even want to say those words. I mean, how many of us have hopes and plans of things? Let me say it this way. How many of you had hopes and plans for things to work out a certain way? Yeah. And then suddenly something happened. And those plans and those dreams and those thoughts and all those things you wanted to do were changed or they were diverted. And life turned out completely different than you thought it would. Whether it's a tragedy like a job loss or a sickness, the death of a child, a disaster. The question we need to think about today is, can we trust God in the midst of those type of life-changing events? Can we? I hope so. Anybody remember the movie of Mice and Men? It's an old, it came out originally in 1939 and then they remade it in 1992. And it was based on John Steinbeck's novel. The original phrase went like this: the best laid schemes o' mice and men. And this especially means that we must carefully have our most careful prepared plans, and we need to be prepared that they all may go wrong. They all may go in a different direction. This actually, even going back further, was found in Robert Burns' poem, To a Mice, in 1786. Right? And this is how it went. It said, "But, Mousie, thou art know thy lane, or you are not alone, in proving foresight may be vain, that the best played schemes o' mice and men gang oft alglee," which means often go awry. Here's where this comes from. He was plowing a field and he upturned a mouse's nest. And as he watched these mice scurry, and some of them actually died accidentally as he plowed up this field, he wrote this poem to a mouse. That even though life was just going along as it always thought it would, that something can happen and something can come along and plow up your field. And it will turn out totally different than you ever imagined. So let's think about it. 20 years ago, did you ever imagine that you would be doing or you would be where you are today? Now, some of you live one of those lives where you eat the same breakfast every morning at the same restaurant every morning, and the thought of going somewhere else is totally off your radar. I don't know anybody like that. I'm not going to pick on you because Jorge already wore you out last Sunday, so I'm going to leave you alone. But how many of us thought or planned that we would be where we are today? It seems like we're all in the same boat. I see the affirmation in your face like, wow, no, I never would have thought this. So this morning, as we look at our text in Proverbs chapter 16, we're going to look at verses 1 through 9. I believe this will help us as we face the uncertainty of this life. You like my little mice? Yeah, they're cute till you find one in your bedroom. We had one, we were living on Liberty Street, and we had a mouse run through the bedroom. We saw Jeter. We have an attack dog. He's a Shih Tzu. And he's standing, named Derek Jeter. He's standing on the end of the bed, and his tail's wagging. And I'm like, what is he doing? I look over, and there's a mouse. And he's going, hey, what's up, buddy? Can we play? You know, I'm like, you're supposed to kill those things. But anyway, so he was cute till I saw him in my bedroom. Then we set the mouse trap, and it was different after that. It went, oh, mousy. Did you ever imagine? Peanut butter. So, as we enter this text, I want us to think about and remember all those moments of uncertainty. All those times when the farmer plows up your row. First of all, we need to remember that in the midst of that transition, in the midst of that uncertainty, number one, that God has a plan. God has a plan, which ultimately means God's in control. Even when it seems like He is as far away as the east is from the west. God has a plan, and He is in control. Let me make this statement. I believe that the essence of all sin is the illusion that you are in control. Which means if you think you're in control, then ultimately you're saying, well, I'm God. How many times have we heard people say, I got this? I think God kind of goes, oh boy. Whenever we say, I got this, and we're like, oh boy. So what does it mean when we play God? To play God means living under the delusion that you are in control or that your life is controllable. Listen to this quote I found. The real disease from which almost all of us suffer is the disease of playing God, of thinking we are or should be in control of what happens to us in life. As long as you maintain the illusion of control, you're fine. But eventually and inevitably, life slips out of control and you are faced with a very difficult choice. Quit playing God and abandon the delusion of life's controllability, or find some way to escape the reality and maintain the illusion that you are in control. One of the biggest problems we have is we believe that somehow we have the power to control our lives and even the power to control the lives of people that touch our lives or things that happen to us. We do everything we can to make sure we have no surprises. I love that commercial where the guy's like, I hate surprises. And he goes to the door and they go, surprise! He goes, he just hates them. And we're like that. We hate being surprised. I don't like being afraid and scared. I don't ride roller coasters. I don't go to scary movies. You see my posts on Facebook. I don't go to scary movies. I don't even like it when the advertisements come on. I go, if I can't get to the remote control in time, if I happen to have left it over there, and I'm like, la, 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 la. My wife comes like, what are you doing? I'm like, la, 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 la. I don't like being scared. I don't like the unknown. I don't like uncertainty like that. And I think a lot of us are like that. We don't like surprises. And I would venture to say that most of us, if not all of us, have planned out our future. We know exactly what we're supposed to be doing, but unfortunately we make all those plans assuming or thinking that they're God's plans. Well, that's why our text is going to kind of help us understand this. In verses 1 through 3, it says, mortals make elaborate plans, but God has the last word. Humans are satisfied with whatever looks good, but God probes for what is good. Put God in charge of your work, and then what you've planned will take place. How many of us make plans because they look good? We do that, don't we? We make plans because it seems right to us, only to get there and to realize that maybe God had a better plan. So God reminds us to put Him in charge, to trust in His ways, because He has the power to make our paths straight. He knows the direction. In the Voice version, it says the Eternal made everything for a reason. Even wrongdoers fit in His plan. Troubled times await them. So let's think about that for a minute. If God made everything and everything is a part of His plan, we have to consistently trust Him even though it seems like evil is in charge. We have to remember that we are not God and that we have to trust Him and trust that He is still in control. So not only does God have a plan, but we also see that God has a purpose. He's got a purpose for everything. Verse 4, it says that God made everything with a place and a what? A purpose. This is especially important for us to remember as we think about the future. As we contemplate God's will for our lives, we can rest in knowing that it is God's purpose that we need to long to fulfill. In all reality, shouldn't that be our heart's desire? Right? To fulfill God's purpose in our lives? It should be, absolutely. That needs to be the cry of our hearts. I love what it says in Acts 13:36. It says, when David had served God's what? Purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep. That's it. That's it. That was what was most important about David's life, is that he fulfilled God's purpose for his life. So here's the truth. Here's the reality I think we need to grab a hold of today. Each and every one of us has a God-given purpose. We were created by God, and He created us with a purpose. So all the stuff that we face in life is all about God fulfilling His plan and His purpose in us. You noticed in the video where it showed her arm get snatched off by the shark, which is another one of those things I don't like to think about. And then it showed her struggling to kind of figure God's purpose in a shark attack. And then did you notice the scene where she was standing there and a little girl took her by the hand? If you remember the story, she decided to go on a missions trip. And she hadn't gone in the water since her arm got taken away. And so when she was standing on that shore, she suddenly began to realize that God had a purpose in this accident. And she grabbed that little child by the hand, and then all the kids got in the water, and she began to discover that there was more to life than just her talent, her ability to surf and to win contests and to be popular and to be beautiful and have modeling contracts. It was more to it than that. She was able to minister to all those kids on that beach, and she may never have done that had it not been for the accident. We're created with a purpose. So everything that we go through, all the stuff you face, has a purpose for it. It's not just, oh, well, here we go again. Atheist Bertrand Russell once said this: unless you assume a God, the question of life's purpose is meaningless. Pretty interesting for an atheist to say. Unless you assume there is a God, the question of life's purpose is meaningless. I don't think he's a very good atheist. I think he's a closet Christian, yeah. In Colossians 1:16, it says, for everything, absolutely everything above and below, visible, invisible, everything got started in Him and finds its purpose in Him. You see, the purpose for your life is far greater than your own personal fulfillment or peace of mind or even your happiness. God's purpose for you is greater than your family. It's greater than your career. It's greater than your dreams. It's greater than your ambitions. Rick Warren, in his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, said this: if you want to know why you were placed on this planet, you must begin with God. You were born by His purpose and for His purpose. So when your purpose begins and ends with God, then it's not about you, is it? It's not about your happiness. It's not about your career. It's not about fulfilling your dreams and your hopes and your plans. I promise you, if you're trying to find your purpose and looking within, you will be disappointed. You will at some point come and say, man, I have missed it. This text we're reading says that God made everything with a place and with a purpose, and that God made everything for a reason. So you and I will never figure out our purpose by focusing on ourselves. We must begin with God, our Creator. You exist because God willed you to exist. And you were made by God and for Him. Again, Rick says, it is only in God that we discover our origin and our identity and our meaning and our purpose and our significance and our destiny. Every other path will lead to a dead end. God's got a plan. He's got a purpose for all this. And that is only conceivable because, number 3, God has the power. He's the one holding the plug. He's got the power. I got the power. Sorry. It was there. Everybody dance now. Verse 7. When God, I gotta get a drink after that. Yeah. It is water. I'll never tell. Verse 7. When God approves your life, even your enemies will end up shaking their heads. God's power is found in His approval of your life. When God looks at you and goes, yeah, you're fulfilling your purpose in this world. That's where God's power begins to flesh out in our lives. I mean, how often do we seek man's approval before we seek God's approval? We are so often consumed with what others think instead of what God thinks. When God places His stamp of approval on your life, that is when life really begins. That is when you experience God's incredible power in your life, because it's not about how good I am. It's not about how awesome I think I can be or how much money I have, but it is about how great He is and His grace present and His power present in my life. Our text says when that happens, even the enemy will be surprised. Even the enemy will say, what in the world? Right? When Paul was speaking to the Ephesian church, he said this, I pray also that you would understand the incredible greatness of God's power for us who believe in Him. This is the same mighty power that raised Christ from the dead and seated Him in the place of honor at God's right hand in the heavenly realms. So you see, no matter how crazy and out of control you and I may think life has become, God has the power to fulfill His purpose and His plan in your life. In fact, it is that same power that raised Christ from the dead that lives in us. Think about that. That incredible power that raised Jesus from the dead, the Bible says, dwells in me. In Romans 8, the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. And just as God raised Christ from the dead, He will give life to your mortal bodies by the same Spirit living within you. So it stands to reason that if all powerful,
alive and present God, the one who raised Jesus from the dead, moves into your life, he'll do the same thing in you that he did in Jesus. Remember, Jesus wrestled with God's plan for his life. In the garden, that was a real wrestling match. Sweating drops of blood. But he will give you that same ability to say, not what I want, God, but what you want. And when God lives and breathes in you, and he does, as surely as he did in Jesus, then you are delivered from that dead life with a spirit living in you. Your body will be as alive as Christ is alive. And the only way this can happen, the only way we can manage to figure and listen and discern and choose God's best plan for our lives is, number 4, is because God makes it possible. God makes it possible. There's some smart people in this room. There are. You guys are some smart people. And you're going, really? Oh, yeah, you are. You're smart people. But even the smartest of the smartest people in this room or in Asheboro or in North Carolina or across this world, even the smartest of the smartest people cannot discern what God's good and perfect will is for them without God making it possible. I believe that with all my heart. Listen to what it says in verse 9. We plan the way we want to live. But only God makes us able to live it. I can't do this without him. I can't pastor without him. I've tried. I've tried to do it Ed's way. Figure it out. I'm a chair straightener and I like to know what's going on. They made fun of me all morning because I'm straightening chairs. I was so glad I went to one of the church planners assessment centers, and one of my colleagues, Mike Brown, he lives in Minnesota. He said, dude, every Sunday before church, because now he works for the denomination, but every Sunday, he said, while the worship team was rehearsing, guess what I did? I said, tell me you straighten chairs. He said, I did, and I hugged him. You're one of us. They even said when I spoke in the youth a couple Wednesday nights while Brian was out of town, they walked in and they go, well, we know Brian's not here. I'm like, why? All the chairs, they're coordinated. I had the right rows and the right amount of chairs because you got different colored chairs in there, and that messed with me, all right? I'm just going to say that messed with me. But I was able to overcome that because I set them in different sections equally. Only God makes it possible. The only way that I am able to fulfill God's plan for me is because God makes it possible. The only way that you will ever be able to discover what God's will is good and pleasing, His perfect will for you, for your life. And I don't care how old you are. If you got a pulse, you got a purpose. God's got you here for a reason. The folks over at the nursing home are learning that because you guys are there. They're learning that even though some people, it's almost, some families, they put their families there, they're kind of putting them out to pasture and they come see them when they feel like it. You're teaching those people over there that they got a purpose. And that is awesome. I think that's probably one of the greatest things, other than the fact you've seen over 60 people come to Jesus in that home in the 6 years you've been there. That's awesome. But you're also teaching those folks they got a purpose. That's powerful. We need to learn that. We need to discern that and discover that in each and every one of our lives. Listen to what the Message paraphrase says about this process in Romans 8:5-8. That those who think they can do it on their own end up obsessed with measuring their own moral muscle. I'm glad it didn't say measuring the chairs. I would really be in bad shape right there. But they never get around to exercising it in real life. But those who trust God's action in them find that God's Spirit is in them, living and breathing God. Obsession with self in these matters it's a dead end. But attention to God leads us out into the open, into a spacious, free life. This is where freedom happens for the believer. When we understand that it's not about our plans, it's not about what we think, but it's about what God thinks. We're out in the open, a free life. Focusing on the self is the opposite of focusing on God. Let me say that again. Focusing on self is the opposite of focusing on God. Anyone completely absorbed in self ignores God, ends up thinking more about self than God. That person ignores who God is and what God is doing. God isn't pleased with being ignored. So listen to what God is saying to us today. God's got a plan for your life. I know some of you have been through some incredible trials. And I know that when you're in those places, the last thing you want to hear is somebody who's not been and walked in the shoes you're walking in and say, oh, you're going to be fine. God's got this. God's got your back. I know that's hard to hear. So I hope you don't hear that message in what God's saying today. Because while you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, while you're facing, Satan eyeball to eyeball, God is with you. He does have a plan for that stuff. Even when the shark takes your arm, God has a plan. In fact, Brian and I were talking on our way to the Catalyst conference, and he was telling about what he was sharing with the students Wednesday night. And I thought, man, can I use that passage in my... He's like, yeah, I'll give you permission. Ephesians 2:10. It's not in your notes, but it's here on the screen. When we get this notion that it's bigger, that God's bigger than us, that it's not about us, we begin to understand this incredible truth that we are God's masterpiece. And what do you do with a masterpiece? You don't hang a masterpiece on the back of the bathroom door. Right? You don't hang a masterpiece in the laundry room or in the outbuilding. Where do you put a masterpiece? Where everybody, you put lights, soft music. I mean, you let everybody know this is important to me. This has value. And that's exactly what God says about you. Now, I'm not talking about your outward beauty, because we all know that makeup can only do so much. That exercise can only do so much. I'm not talking about that outward beauty. I'm talking about all of you. All this. And it includes everything. You're a masterpiece. He created you anew in Christ Jesus so that you can do the good things that He had planned for you to do long ago. That blows my mind. That He actually knew one day that I would be doing this. That doesn't make any sense to me at all, because I know this. And I know what I think about myself. I know what I see in the mirror. That's me. That's what I see in the mirror, a little mouse. So whatever's happened to you in your life, whatever has plowed up your plans, you were just going along doing your thing, and life happened. A life interrupted. I want you to know God's got a plan and a purpose for all of it. He really does. And by His power and by His ability in your life, He will help you to walk that path. And He said these great words, I will be with you in it. I'll be with you in it. Joy, if you'll come up. I want us to think about how incredibly powerful God is this morning. That nothing you have faced, nothing you have encountered, no trial you have gone through, no pain that you have ever felt, and maybe in the middle of what you're going through right this minute, that God is powerful enough to carry you, to hold you, to bring you through it. What is it, the saying? The same God that brought you to it will bring you through it. That's the God I'm talking about today. Let's bow our heads. Father, today, we invite you. I mean, even though you're here, it seems kind of silly to say we invite you. God, we acknowledge that you're here in this place. That you're a faithful God. God, help us to trust you. Help us to trust you when the worst news comes over the phone. Help us to trust you when we get that message from the doctor that we didn't want to get, that was the furthest from our minds, that was not a part of what we had in planned. Help us to trust you. This morning, if you've been discouraged, if you've been at the point where you just had one more hit. And then when you began to get through that one, another hit came. It's almost as if you're on the shore and the waves just keep washing over you and you feel like you can't breathe anymore. This morning, as the worship team leads us, I invite you to come and receive the hope that only God can give. Won't you come?